All right, let's get started here. We have a new video. It's called How World of Warcraft is Improving Its UI. It's a WoWCast video, so we'll take a peek at this and see what's going on.
Welcome to a special edition of WoWCast, where we're going to talk about a patch 11.1.7 feature, and then a broader discussion about add-ons in World of Warcraft in general. I'm Dratnos, World of Warcraft content creator.
I'm Max. I'm the raid leader of Team Liquid, the WoW Guild, and a content creator as well.
What's up, dude?
And I'm Ian Hazekostas, game director on WoW, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
What's going on, guys?
Very excited to be here.
I'm excited too.
So what are we doing in 11.1.7?
A whole bunch of fun stuff, but one of the features that we're extra excited about is a new UI option that we're adding called Rotation Assist, which is really designed to help players who are maybe picking up a new spec or want some guidance on what abilities they should be using when without having to turn to third-party add-ons for it. So we've seen that there's an add-on called Hekili that is very popular with a lot of players. We're basically building in a very similar version of that into the base UI that you can opt into. That will, no matter what DPS spec you're playing, highlight the recommended next ability given your current energy, what's going on around you, and so forth. One extra thing that we're also going to do, which maybe goes a bit beyond what the add-ons can do, is also have a one-button version of that, where there'll be like a keybind that if you just want almost an auto rotation, you can opt into that, and it will just automatically cast the next recommended ability in the sequence. There'll be a small GCD penalty associated with that, but we want to make sure that this is for accessibility purposes, that it's there for people who maybe just honestly aren't interested in the gameplay of like mastering their spec.
That's interesting.
They want to explore Azeroth and experience the story, and the mechanics kind of get in the way of that sometimes. This should be for them. Ideally, this is not a tool where someone is like being told by their raid leader to.
I'm going to pause that real quick. One little thing we should notice in what he just said is there's going to be a GCD penalty. So it's not going to replace, you're not going to be able to, you can use it, I'm sure you can use it in a Mythic Plus scenario, but let's be real. It's probably going to, the penalty is going to, yes, it makes sense. It's not a bad idea.
Stop trying to DPS manually and just turn on the one button mode to meet some DPS check. That we want to give you the tools to kind of go through that organic progression naturally.
Great.
But the rotation assist doesn't come with a penalty or anything like that. That's just we're going to show you what your next button is.
Exactly.
Right.
It's very similar to the Hekili add-on. It's kind of reflecting just the latest kind of established theory crafting, and it's something that we would continue to update with spec changes and class changes over time. Ideally, it all's born out of the idea that we've seen a valuable tool that players feel like they should be looking outside the game to download, and we'd rather just reduce the barriers to that and make it available to everyone.
Okay, yeah, because there's two parts of it, right? Like the advanced is, I want to really go into this, is the one button thing, but that's not necessarily everyone that's going to use this. Like I think this game, especially new players getting into it, there's a lot going on within a particular class, and you can be a little lost trying to figure out exactly what I should be pressing. So even just using it as like as a guide to start learning your class and move off of it eventually, but just having a base understanding of what actually should I be doing at a base level of this.
That's really exactly the motivation on our end.
That's the best way to put it. I was saying that before we started this video. It's so hard to get into this game, and there is so many things, boundaries you have to leap over just to even get started. So it's a good way to get new players in the game. If you have a homie or a friend that you think would want to try it, but the game's been out for 20 some odd years, it's a good idea. I'm about this.
And I mean, especially with warbands and War Within, we see lots and lots more alts, and leveling is pretty quick. You got a bunch of warbound until equipped gear that you're passing over to a new character, and just jumping into their full rotation. We've never played the spec seriously before, can be a pretty serious undertaking. And for some people, this may be enough for them, and that's fine too. But we recognize that there's so much. WoW has such a high skill ceiling that just recommending what the next ability isn't going to really remove that or fully solve that. There's still the muscle memory that you need to form, and then all of the nuances of like, we might have a recommendation for a rotation that makes sense if you're fighting a target dummy, you're fighting patchwork, but when you need to plan around the fact that you're going to have to move in 4 seconds, that's a whole different layer of skill that still rests with players.
Yeah, I know when I'm trying to, play a new spec for the first time or haven't played it in years, it often feels like I've got like a 30-minute checklist of okay, I got to set up my keybinds, got to make sure, oh, this ability's changed since 2 expansions ago, I got to rebind that. And then I got to go and read some guides and figure out how all my new rotation works, and oh, here's how the new set bonus works, so.
Just a side note, these guys are looking good, dude. They're all spiffy. These guys look good, dude. Looking all spiffed up. Let's go.
I could see it being really nice to just have this is a way to jump into some content to do with your friends and have it work out nice and easily. One thing that jumps out to me is that a lot of the content I'd want to do would be like delves or keys. And in either of those cases, there's a lot of AoE.
Yeah.
Is this going to have are we going to detect whether we're fighting 3 targets, 5 targets, and is it going to cast my Arcane Explosion instead of my Arcane Blast, or is it just always going to be a single target?
It's not just single target.
Right.
There is some sense of how many enemies are within your range, in front of you, etc. And so that will affect the recommendations. Again, the goal is not optimal. The goal is not like this is going to okay, everyone's always going to get perfect parses and so forth going forward.
Yeah.
But as a baseline, this should be it should be useful the same way that many people find Hakila useful today. And really, like a lot of this building on the foundations of the cooldown manager that just came out in 11.1.5 kind of reflects us hearing people in the community telling us that they feel like they need to seek out these third-party resources just to play the game at like a baseline effective level in competitive content. And us asking, like, is that where we want the game to be in the long term? And what can we do to build in native solutions to many of these problems?
Like the base construct of it, there is this will help you learn what you're supposed to do if you are new. And then there is hey, I don't want to be the best player at this game. That's totally fine. I play it for a different reason. I want to collect things. I want to like understand the story. I want to quest. I want to level, right? And I don't want to feel like I can go into any content and I just don't really know what I'm doing. I feel anxious about that. Like you have the ability to just be like, okay, well at least Blizzard's got me. I can have something at a base level where I can press one button and just kind of hang out and play the game. I have one question about the actual rotational thing. So is that going to like change with talents? So like let's say, is it going to work off the base talent build, or let's say you select a talent that now moves a AoE button into your single target rotation? Is it going to be smart enough or planned to be smart enough to incorporate a bunch of different potential talent builds?
The goal is that it's aware of your talents, and the logic is conditional based on what you do or don't have talented. As with, this is going to be something that continues to evolve. We may not have every single possible permutation accounted for in the version that we roll out with, but it should still be very useful in that form to everyone, and we'll just get refined from there. Similar to the cooldown manager that we know is like, that is a first take at this. We have plans to add much more customization, much more functionality to that over time as well.
Okay.
This is the best thing they could do for, just in the eyes of a new player, it's the perfect thing to do. The last thing you want to worry about as someone coming into this game is what buttons to push to get through basic content when it comes to storyline. Like if you're just doing, you're going through a raid, like the story mode raid, just to get through it so you can get a quest done. Why does that person have to know the perfect, most optimal rotation to get stuff done? That makes perfect sense, right? And I like how there is going to be 2 versions of this. There's the one button spam, where you can just hit one button and it does your rotation for you with a GCD penalty. So having that penalty will get rid of like any high-end content. Like you won't be able to do big keys or mythic rating per se with this one button rotation. But they also have the next button, like the whatever it's going to be called, the rotation for you. It's going to highlight the button to use. That's gonna tell, dude. That might give you guys a new look at your class. I like this, dude. I like this. It's gonna be good.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting feature individually. The thing that's most exciting to me is in the broader context of the cooldown manager, of all these other edit mode changes that have come out. There was a time 5 years ago in WoW where if you were just getting into the game, there was an intimidating list of these are the add-ons that you need. And if you're not using these, you're kind of worse, right? Like you're noticeably worse. If you can't track your group member's major cooldown, right? Like you're worse at Mythic Plus than somebody who is, right?
It is.
And it seems
what
like
it
the
is. It's not
goal
wrong.
that has been accomplished with a lot of these things that have been coming into the base UI is you can use those add-ons if you want, but we now have a native way to the game that you don't have to get an add-on.
That is pretty much exactly our long-term philosophical goal here, right? Like add-ons are amazing. The things that the community has done over the last 20 years to allow people to experience different aesthetics, different functionality, have information available at their fingertips. Like, that is a huge part of WoW's success, and we don't question or want to undermine that for a moment. At the same time, like as you said, ideally it is about what do you want? How do you prefer to have things presented to you, and not what do you have to do? What is a group mate or raid leader or whatever telling you you must download? Or if you ask people, hey, how can I get better? I'm really struggling at this. The first answer shouldn't be, well, download this add-on, and this add-on, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Because that's starting to get into that mandatory place, whether we like it or not. So yeah, I think, longer term, these initiatives kind of fit into part of how we're thinking about the role of add-ons in WoW. As we can probably all agree, today, there is a sense that if you want to really be the best you can, if you want to play competitive content, there are certain add-ons that are required, that are simply going to improve your success over not having them, period. We would like to get away from that being the case. I think I'd love to see a WoW one day where you can still customize the aesthetic look of your UI, you can have information and quest helpers and all the other things that you might want to have to make your experience a bit more seamless. But that at the end of the day, when you're in competitive content, when you're queuing up for a rated PvP match, when you're going into a high key, when you're trying to get a first kill on a raid boss, there isn't the sense that you are, just holding yourself back if you're not using specific tools. We know that there's a lot of work to do to get to a place where that could be the reality. The first steps really are going to be continuing to build up the just right out of the box functionality that World of Warcraft offers to shrink that gap. But at the same time, I think we're aware that at the very end of this process, we probably are going to have to rein in some of the functionality that add-ons currently have to do like real-time in-combat problem solving specifically, where it's like automating coordination, communication in ways that are always going to be better than anything the UI can natively provide you, as long as they remain possible.
Yeah, so that moves us into like raid bosses, where I don't want to name any names, but there are people who have optimized a little bit of their own fun out of the game sometimes. I don't know where any of them might be sitting. They could be anywhere. They could be in this room with us.
Wow.
Hey man, I am the number one.
He's throwing shade.
Let's just YOLO this.
Crazy.
Let's just do the fight. Let's make it work. And then sometimes it gets to let's try to make something that could be 95% successful, 100 or 99, right? And there's a lot of frustration with the tech involved with that. I would definitely be. I think a lot of the rating community would be pretty for that. I think a well-designed mechanic that the game giving you enough information to solve this on your own realistically. A lot of the times the community will just use one because it's like what everyone else uses. It gets you in the same place. But if that doesn't exist and the game is giving you that information, it's objectively better, right? And
even if you are doing it very well, manually, it's always going to be better to do it perfectly in a competitive situation. I mean, having watched, your raid leading, for example, over many, many years over the race to world first, like years ago, you would call much more stuff verbally.
Very
like
true.
Going back to, Legion, BFA era, whereas nowadays it seems like if there is something you're calling repeatedly on attempts, the first thing you're doing is asking if, hey, can we automate this and get me out of the business of talking, which seems like it might be less enjoyable for you as a raid leader.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if we're talking about that, I could talk all day about that. Yeah. No. I felt like you certainly had more of an impact when you had the ability to, influence the fight more. But the reality is just getting some way to automate it for your players is just better. It is funny. Like when I do that now, I think, what else can I be doing with my time? I could be like looking at other ways to optimize, and it's purely for the sake of getting better. So yeah, for my own enjoyment, yeah, that's sweet. Let's do that. I'm trying to wonder also about those kind of mechanics. So like what bosses have existed in my head, I think in the past couple of years, there's not many, but have been defined by when we're progressing this boss, we feel like maybe we're progressing a weak aura. Something like Brood Twister or Echo of Neltharion or Jailer maybe was one of the first ones, right? And those mechanics, I feel like, could not have been done or probably would have been nerfed without weak auras or having that effectiveness of that reduced. What do you do as a fight designer now? Do you I know you're obviously like really passionate about raiding. You've raided for a really long time. What do you have to avoid those kind of assignment mechanics? Are there things in game you can use to like naturally sort out those things? Like, do you give more time for the mechanics? Like do you have to stray away from assignments in general because the community has just, whether you like it or not, has like trained themselves to have something solve that for them? Do you have to like go back into like a more simple version of that? Do you find other ways to make fights difficult? There's obviously a bunch of ways to do that.
The way we design encounters.
I have many takes on this. It's kind of hard to find like common ground. But I like when it just makes the game more enjoyable when you're not able to automate things. When they take away something that makes the game like to the point where you're not even playing the game anymore. It gets rid of like group communication, group synergy. It takes away like all the aspects that made World of Warcraft the game it is today, right? So when you have weak auras and add-ons that do generally play the game for you because it's doing all the thinking for you, it takes, in my opinion, it takes away the fun. But I mean, I guess we'll see where they're going with it.
Has been influenced in significant ways by the way players use add-ons. I know, the community sometimes speculates that, this was built clearly to require an add-on. I can say that's never the case. No encounter designer is ever sitting around saying, all right, we're going to make this mechanic, and then players will write this weak aura to solve it this way. All right, mission accomplished, let's ship the boss. But when we're thinking about the overall pacing of a fight, the tuning, we might get feedback on a fight that it feels like there isn't enough going on, when in actuality, there are 4 or 5 mechanics going on, but add-ons are largely compartmentalizing and making it so that most players don't have to think about them most of the time. And then players give us feedback that, hey, this fight felt a little bit slow, like I was just punching the boss for 3 minutes. And so then maybe we add another mechanic in the next iteration of that, or a similar encounter. We get to a higher overall complexity space where, there's just, you look at the dungeon journey.
Hold on. Are we DCing? Really? We do a video and I can't, it's just DCing? And are we here? Are we live? Tell me if you guys can hear me. Hold on. Hold. I don't know. Hold on. Am I back? Refresh. Hello? If you guys hear me and I'm back, I'll hit play again. I just want to make sure it's back. We're going to have to edit that out. That's unfortunate. Let me know when you guys can hear me and I'll hit continue. Alright, everyone make sure you refresh. We're gonna hit play in 10 seconds. That's unfortunate. I paused it immediately, guys, so. Alright. Alright, here we go.
And you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and maybe half of it doesn't even matter because add-ons are going to handle it for you. I think that's not a great place for things to land. It also definitely ties our hands in some ways. Like, I think we do fewer coordination mechanics than we used to. Like, there used to be, like, if you look at old school WoW days, there were encounters where, like, the primary challenge for your raid was by design coordinating some rotation. And the execution beyond that wasn't super complicated, but making sure that this thing stayed soaked or that, you were rotating people through with their debuff or whatever, that became a big part of the fight's challenge. Now we know ultimately that that can never be the thing that we lean on for challenge because it's going to be solved, and it's not going to be solved through what we think of as the more just interesting MMOE, like communication, cooperation, figuring out systems for having these things work in a way that feels collaborative, it's going to be downloading the weak aura pack, setting it up appropriately, maybe having 3 or 4 frustrating wipes because there was a typo in the configuration, which is like, that's not what I think anyone really wants raiding to be. And so we move away from making those mechanics as much and lean more on things that add-ons can't solve for you, like moving out of a swirly under your feet with only a little bit of time to respond. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that more and more of our fights have those sorts of just like twitch reaction, avoidance mechanics, whereas that used to be one type of fight that we did. The design space is definitely constrained by the knowledge that, if we lean on it too heavily, it's just going to get trivialized.
Some of my favorite WoW raid boss memories are bosses like Mythic Unat, Mythic Anduin. You have to spread out and then you get these marks and you have to go to the right places. And there used to be definitely a library of mechanics like that where you would get them and then you'd have to think and you'd have to have like a system and you'd have to have 20 players sort of coordinate and become one team that does a mechanic like that. And the fact now that add-ons take on much of that job of coordinating us.
Exactly.
I think that
it's not good for the
almost
game.
all the Mythic Raiders I know would be delighted to move back to a world where we did that in our brains, right?
Rewind.
But in Dragonflight, we saw a little bit of an attempt to make that happen, right, with the private aura system. And what ended up happening was we still had the weak aura, but now we also have a macro that we need to press, and then the weak aura will assign us the same thing. So I'm a little bit worried. How's the arms race between the weak aura devs trying to come up with a new way around the restriction that you're putting in gonna?
It's kind of interesting if you look at it like this. They obviously don't go into fight designs with the mindset that they have to design a fight around an add-on. And they shouldn't have to think like that. There shouldn't be any world where a boss designer has to think, oh wait, how do I make this boss fun because they're going to be using X, Y, and Z add-ons. That shouldn't even be a thing. They should. I don't know how they could fix this. I guess they'll get into it now, but removing some of the capabilities that weak auras can do could solve some of these issues when it comes to the game. Because I think communication, team effort is the way boss fights should be done. It shouldn't be all we shouldn't all have to lean on a weak aura or an add-on that does the fight for us. How's that even fun? That takes the fun right out of it, right? Because when you kill a boss, you did it all on your own. You don't have all these add-ons telling you exactly what to do. The feeling is different than if you had something scripted perfectly for you.
Is this just a further escalation in that?
Hopefully not. I think our goal here is kind of disarmament and definitely not further escalation. I think we understand that if we're not going to try more little targeted things like that are going to encourage workarounds and it just ends up with this back and forth. Because if there is a way to solve a complex mechanic, but you have to jump through a couple of more hoops to do so, you'll do that, and then just be more annoyed by the process. Our goal is to try to get out of that space entirely. And so I think down the line eventually, that may mean, I think, some broader restrictions on specifically what information add-ons have access to about combat events in real time.
I like that.
At the same time, we know that that's not a thing that we could just do right now without providing a lot more on our end, both in terms of just UI type functionality, but also looking at how we're designing.
It's kind of interesting that he's saying it like this. He's saying it in a way where, okay, designing a fight, when they're designing a specific fight, if the player base says, oh, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this as a team, let's go find an add-on to do it for us. It comes back to square one. It's because that's how the fight was designed. It's to the point where people feel as their team isn't coordinated enough to do it on their own, so they have to find outside sources to help them. So they need to draw back the design. They need to go back square one, design team, and figure out how to avoid that, or maybe implement design cues that take away from add-on the necessity of add-ons, right? There's so many ways they can attack this, but I guess it really depends.
Designing some encounters, how some of our classes work. I think there are tons of add-ons that are healthy and valuable and really important to how players play the game that do rely on that flow of information. Everything from something as simple as damage meters to like, honestly, boss time, like ability timelines, like the DBM style, like when is this next ability going to fire that people have basically been raiding with forever. That's not the like computational weak auras. That's just, hey, this ability is going to happen in 15 seconds. Like we want to build in our own version of that. Like I think like down the line, we'd love to see a place where there is a boss timeline as just part of the encounter UI. And that's not something you need an add-on for. And that way we can hopefully eventually get to a point where we're really just cutting out the weak aura that solves the mechanic for you, but not the informational stuff that you feel like, it really feels like the game should have been telling you all along, where add-ons are, admittedly, kind of filling in some gaps there.
Okay, so coming in 11.1.7, we're going to have the rotation helper, those two options. What of the rest of this initiative, is any of the rest of this in 11.1.7, or are we just starting the conversation now?
I think there's a lot of stuff that we're working on. I think, we've seen the cooldown manager and then the rotation assist coming. I think down the line, it's some of the stuff that I touched on. I don't have specific patch dates right now, but we are looking at damage meters. We're looking at nameplate improvements. We are looking at, like a raid encounter information presentation that shows you timeline of boss abilities coming up. Things in that general space. I think we're looking at all the places where players say right now, you need this weak aura, you need this add-on to be competitive, and asking ourselves like, how do we change our game to make that not the case? And some of that's going to be add-on functionality, or UI functionality. Other aspects are going to be looking at how we're building some encounters or how some class mechanics work. Like I think it's super fair to point at some specs, like let's say Outlaw Rogue, who I know are easy one to pick on in some of these ways, and ask like, how is anyone really supposed to execute this perfectly with the base UI? Almost any time we're tracking like stacks of a buff, and you need to make a decision where it's like, if you're between 4 and 7 stacks, you should do this, otherwise don't. That is not, those are not reasonable tests for us to be posing to our players without providing them the information to do it correctly. And so we need to either provide the information, simplify the mechanic, or both.
There are a lot of players who love the version of Outlaw Rogue that has existed over the past few years. So I think there's always some fear when this discussion starts up of, is the answer going to be to simplify everything? And I think it's really exciting to hear instead that the answer is, okay, we'll maybe simplify some of these huge outliers,
a little bit of it,
we're going to bring in the functionality that makes it so that instead of needing to download a weak aura to solve this, right? Instead of needing to have a complicated assistant tell you, now you're supposed to press this button, now you're supposed to press this button, instead we're going to provide that information in a more clear way than looking at the top right of your screen to see your buffs and trying to catch the rotation buff between all the other 20 that are changing in combat.
That's definitely the goal. I think we want World of Warcraft to be as approachable as possible, but we also love that the skill ceiling in the game is as incredibly high as it is. That allows for tons of differentiation and self-expression and accomplishment. But I think a lot of, at its core, a lot of skill in WoW I think boils down to multitasking ability, and like even just you might be able to do amazing damage just testing it against a target dummy. Very different world when you're also in an encounter and need to do 3 mechanics at the same time. And we see tunnel visioning DPS are a meme for a reason, right? They're just focused on their rotation and whoops, they just messed up the encounter mechanic, or vice versa. Someone who is good at mechanics but their DPS goes off a cliff. Really, like the function of a lot of these add-ons is to offload a portion of that computational complexity. And we recognize like, if we are removing some of that functionality, we're providing more information, we can probably remove a couple of mechanics, but still keep the same level of challenge. The goal is not to make it easier. The goal is to make it less complex. And I think that's, I think it's a key distinction there. Because I think it often can sound like, oh, this is about, this might be about dumbing down the game or simplifying things. It's not that. It's about trying to create a more approachable baseline experience that still has every bit as much room for differentiation.
That makes so much sense.
When you're talking about add-ons that things have been in the game, been inspired by it, you mentioned a damage meter.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in just what your view is, philosophy-wise, about damage meters in games like this.
Let's hear it.
That's a great question.
Let's hear
it.
I
think ultimately we have to be guided by what our community prefers and what we see them doing today. The single most popular add-on used across the entire game is a damage meter. By like a fair margin.
Okay.
The majority of players, the large majority of players, have a damage meter add-on installed. And so that indicates that people want to see that information at least about themselves. We definitely want more nuanced measures of success and understanding like how successful were you or how much did you contribute on this run, highlighting things like interrupts,
Chat, that's what we do in keys. That's our daily goal, is trying to get you guys to stop looking at just your damage and also looking at your tracked interrupts. Because that's such a big measurement of success when it comes to completing these keys on time. Interrupts, the CCs, right? Crowd control is massive. That's why, like in our keys, it's very noticeable when we bring someone in that could have a rather high IO, right? But they don't interrupt. They have their 5 interrupts total by the end of the key, right? And you don't time the key. Then you bring someone in with just a, mid-tier IO, right? But their interrupts are through the roof. They might have did a little bit less damage than the gamer Chad with the big IO, but their interrupts actually, that's what you needed in that key at that time, and you guys timed the key easier. There is different measurements of success in this game, and we can be looking at different parts, like the details. The damage meters do provide all of that. That's why I have it up on screen all the time during our key sessions. Interrupts is massive.
Highlighting things like avoidable damage to give a fuller picture of performance. But at the end of the day, I think for someone who's trying a new spec, trying a new talent build, getting a new trinket, and they want to see like how did this affect my performance compared to the last run, that's an important piece of information to have.
Sure.
And so I think we know that in any world where we were going to limit some of the ability of add-ons to, like, again, do that real-time combat event tracking, we would need to provide a damage meter solution of our own. And I think one of the exciting things is, I think if we're doing that on our end, we can also have it be server authoritative, so you're not worried about like who's in a different combat phase, who's out of range, or whatever.
Yeah.
It could just be like, this is official and going to be accurate all the time.
We were obviously mostly thinking about Mythic Raid when our brains go to how this is going to affect things, but the overwhelming majority of players are in heroic raids, normal raids, raid finder raids, doing Mythic Plus dungeons, right? When we're talking about making these changes to what WeakAuras can do, is there an appetite for changing how heroic and normal raids function as well? Like, do we see these problems in there as well for what add-ons can do and how they solve things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all trickles down, right? I mean, I think maybe even a larger percentage of players doing Mythic Raid might use specific WeakAura packs than, let's say, normal. But those add-ons are used by the majority of players right now, and certainly other, boss mods are as well. And I think a lot of it just comes down to, what are the coordination challenges that we're presenting? If there's something that everyone is relying on a tool right now to assist with, we would have to change it to still keep it the same level of challenging, but without that same automation assistance. And that can take many forms. It can be there's 1 or 2 fewer things to soak. You have an extra couple of seconds to like actually spread out on the fly. It's a pretty common mechanic of like, all right, 3 people get a debuff and they just have to like run out in different directions from each other. People have been just kind of playing the game and doing those for years and years. But of course, if you can if the time you're given to react is so tight that you can't afford to do that, then people do gravitate towards, all right, we're going to put diamond, circle, and triangle on the ground. Everyone's going to get an auto-assigned marker, and you just know, like, I'm going to run to my marker to guarantee that it's executed correctly. I think
So what's the ultimate reason why people do get WeakAuras, right? The timers are massive, boss timers, and knowing exactly when a specific ability is going to be used by the boss, so you know where to be, where to move, where to stack, where to soak, etc., etc. So if they had some type of in-game, in-house boss timer, they sort of do a little. But yeah, I wonder where they're going to go with that. I guess we'll see.
A bit more interesting if we give you a couple of seconds so that you can look around and make sure you're not running in the same direction, and then do the exact same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, raiding in particular, but group PvE, group PvP too. Like in an MMO, a huge portion of, I think, the fun of it is just coordination, communication, feeling like everyone's working together to overcome some challenge in front of them. And I think getting back
100%.
into a space where there's room for
Please.
more of that organic collaboration, as opposed to it just being like regimented and solved by an external tool, I think it will open up a lot of design avenues for the game going forward.
I'm excited for the future.
Throughout the last
dude.
couple years, especially in Mythic Plus, that had been ramping in complexity. You've seen, and actually, if you can go back, like you can see the amount of things that people have in their UI to help them know that something's happening. So like back in Power Auras, it was, there was just some giant, some giant face on your screen would pop up, and that meant that something procced. And then it's gotten more, refined. And now, even in it's been ramping the past couple of years. You see like, you listen to someone's POV who's doing High Mythic Plus right now, you're going to hear AoE, dodge, frontal, circle.
Yep.
Like, it's just every bit of audio aid they've used to, it's in the idea of being optimal, it's not required. And especially this patch, I think Mythic Plus complexity has actually gone down as an intentional design point, it seems at least. I think you might have made a post about that. So that stuff is less required, but people have like kind of already baked that in the UI. Is that something that you're looking to either have an ability to have that in the game, or is that something you don't want to have happen, where it's more like you're organically doing mechanics because you see them, or are you?
I'm just gonna say this real quick. I am not a fan of the audio cues. I think it's called Gladiator LOSA for PvP. I don't know if that's the one they use for PvE encounters, but I remember using that specific add-on in like an arena match, and it's just constant. It's just constantly telling you exactly what's being popped, what abilities being used, what trinket was just used, and it is giving you, if you use that add-on, it makes you don't miss a single thing. But on the other side, the flip side, who wants to listen to a monotone voice constantly just telling you exactly what's going on every second of every match, right? It takes away from the immersion of the game. It's not fun. But if you're trying to push next level, if you're trying to be the best at what you're doing, it's almost required, unless you're able to remember that stuff on your own. You know exactly who's popping what's going on. You don't need it. But I feel like a lot of high-end PvPers use that add-on.
Okay with all of the audio and visual aids that exist currently within add-ons?
I think the answer is mixed there. I think like audio prompts are something that are super valuable to people. That's something we want to continue to add support for on our end as well. Like we know feedback we've gotten around the 11.1.5 cooldown manager would be that many people would appreciate being able to have audio prompts tied to certain things or procs firing, and that's something they would miss about weak auras. We want to make sure that we're offering that kind of thing as well. Beyond that, I think a lot of what we've seen is frankly us not doing a sufficiently good job of telegraphing the importance of certain mechanics and their impact, and players needing to come up with solutions for them externally. Ideally, there's a concept that we call affordance, which is basically just how well is something telegraphed, how intuitive is it with visual presentation, and ideally, the affordance of a mechanic should match its impact. And sometimes, if you have a random mob in a dungeon pack that has a frontal that will just delete you if you're not getting out of the way of it, and it's just one thing going on among a half dozen other things, why? And why? How could we call that out better with visuals, with a longer cast time, with how we're creating the pack in the first place? And that's just one example of one of the areas in which we know we can do better. Something else we've talked about on the UI front is we would want the ability to, on our end, flag mob casts in Mythic Plus as lethal, as this should be a high priority interrupt, because we know players are going to basically look to solve that anyway. If there are 3 casters in a pack, and 2 of them it's actually kind of okay to let them free cast, but one of them, if they ever get a cast off, you're probably going to wipe. They shouldn't all just look indistinguishable on your screen.
Yeah.
And
what's the bone Maggie in Theater of Pain? The one with the shield? That's a prime example of what he's saying. The other pack, they all look the same, essentially. The other mobs, they look just like that mob, but if that guy casts 1 bone spear, you are dead, right? So but I think we've all been trained long enough that we know that, so that it always dies immediately, but that is a good
I'll expect you to figure that out on your own.
They did that in season 1, right? Wasn't there a couple casts or super giga you die death volley or something?
Yeah.
And they had this big animation.
The Arcara casters where they hunker down, there's green glowy stuff around them, and they're casting a volley, and you're like, all right, I gotta kick that.
You can be playing WoW for 2 days, and you're like, that's
not
not
happening.
That can't happen.
Interrupt that
Yeah.
one,
but I'm looking
for sure.
forward to an M+ then, where if we're talking about maybe taking away my ability to air horn myself on a certain cast, something like that, if instead I have to be now looking at a mob and there is a sort of a visual language that I can come to expect, like if the mob is hunkering down and it's got particle effects around it, that means I gotta kick it. I think that would be more fun for everybody as well,
100%.
rather than having the air horns be the solution.
I like that.
Definitely.
Yes.
That is entirely our hope, right? I think, and just to be super clear, I think we see the taking away part, the restricting functionality, as the end of this long road. I think we know, we want to make it very clear, we're not sitting here being like, all right, we want you to play the game the way we intended, and we're going to take away your tools. We just want to bridge that gap. And we have a lot of work to do on our end to keep building up more improvements, more functionality. And it's not just the UI.
I believe.
The VFX changes that you mentioned are a part of that overall effort of us asking, what are the places where players feel like they need add-ons to succeed? Why is that the case? And when it's like, it's not clear when you're standing in something, and so I need, GTFO or some other, sound effect to let me know that I'm standing in something lethal.
Shout out GTFO.
It should be obvious.
funny.
Let's fix that on our end. And we know we want to keep chipping away at those things, and hopefully eventually get to a point where really the only difference between what we are offering and what powerful add-ons can do is that small subset of like computational problem-solving stuff, at which point we can move forward.
So throughout the evolution of private auras, we've seen, initially when they came out, they were like kind of, a lot of friction was involved. And then I think they were done really, really well in a couple of cases, starting in Amirdrasil, where they were a mechanic like P1 Fire Act. You had the circles you had to quickly spread out for. They were pretty fast, but they were too fast to use a macro for it. And it basically forced the players into something they would have used a weak aura for, to just do the mechanic normally. And like, are there lessons you've learned there of like, this is actually how we can design mechanics or kind of assignment things going forward? And then also, is this, if done successfully, would this also remove private auras as what would have been, I guess, kind of a temporary solution to the weak aura problem?
Yeah, we've definitely learned a lot from how private auras have rolled out. Certainly we understand that if we're ever using it on something that like is on a long enough time frame that macros are going to let you solve it and it's punishing enough to not solve it, all we're doing is creating an extra annoying hoop to jump through, and we like hotfixed off the private aura designation from some of those back in Amirdrasil, and we've let that shape how and where we use or don't use it going forward. And so yeah, I think examples like the Furak mechanic that you mentioned are ones where like when we know that everyone is in a level playing field, everyone just has to play the game, play the mechanic. We can tune it accordingly so that it's hard but doable. We'd like to be able to do more of that for sure.
Yeah, I see the Firac first intermission, which was a private aura and then had to get hotfixed off of the private aura, as sort of a cautionary tale for if there's a mechanic that is only doable with the weak aura assignments, and then we take away that without giving an adequate replacement, then it's worse than doing nothing at all. What would a mechanic like that look like in a world where we don't have a computational solution to it, right? Would it be slower and fewer sets of like lower damage numbers on these things?
I think probably a bit of all of that. There's multiple knobs there. There's, on Mythic we might default to like everyone in today's world, everyone in the raid has to participate in this, and there's enough things to be soaked that if anyone isn't doing it, it's not going to work out. Versus maybe shifting to a world where there's a little bit more slush, things are a little bit slower, there's a little bit more time to react, to get into place organically based on which buff you were assigned, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, our goal here is to preserve challenge, and we know that we'd have to design encounters differently in some cases to deliver roughly the same level of challenge in terms of how many pull counts it takes, just what progression looks like, while living in a different mechanical world. And I know that when we talk about restricting any kind of add-on functionality, many players very rightly, kind of reflexively say or ask, well, how am I supposed to do this boss in this tier without my weak aura? That would be impossible. And the reality is, if you couldn't use that weak aura, that mechanic would be designed or tuned differently. We would have ended up nerfing it right away or designing it differently over the course of even just PTR testing. And so that's like any future design in this space will have to be built from the ground up with that in mind. And I think it's making it a little bit more forgiving in a way that makes the challenge human rather than superhuman, as it often is when we're looking at like cutting edge mythic tuned things. Because you guys are really good at the game, as it turns out, and we want to make a boss that is going to pose a challenge and is going to take you dozens of attempts, let alone 100 plus to beat. We do have to take into account the fact that not just you, but every mythic raid guild that's going to follow in your footsteps are going to be using these tools. And at the end of the day, I think players do want challenging bosses. That if We just tuned the
100%.
boss around none of those things. Players used all those tools, and they went in, and like a late mythic boss was dying in a single night for like, a cutting edge guild, rank 500 or whatever. That probably doesn't match what they're looking to get out of mythic rating, in my estimation. And so like our goal is to keep the same overall level of challenge while paring down the complexity a little bit.
Even if you look at the history of bosses this would have affected, you actually, even looking at Mythic Plus,
I wonder how their design queues and design team will combat this. This is like an interesting conversation, right? Because they've been designing, there's some specific design philosophies they've been using for so long now. And if they're going to go with the mindset into the next raid tier, or however long it's going to take to implement this design queue, I wonder how it's going to be done. Like, how do you think they're going to change the way bosses interact with gamers, players trying to defeat it? What are they going to change to make it so where you don't have to use weak ores? I wonder how these future bosses are going to look. I'm kind of excited. Okay, dude. All right. They're cooking, dude. They're cooking.
Plus, something where the complexity has gone down from pack to pack in this patch, but the reality is you can still find challenge in it because it's infinitely scaling, and you will get to a point where it's doing too much damage to you, or the amount of damage you need to do is too high. There's been mythic bosses that have been simple mechanically, but have been unbelievably difficult, and that's been true all the way down the guild ranks. It's not something that's just nerfed by gear, like Sludge Fist, Kaiveza, where you've created really intricate problems to solve where weak ores basically didn't matter. Halandris, you actually put a bomb timer very clearly in the game around the bomb. You did not need a weak ore for one of the hardest bosses ever, right? It's more just basically the solution for these weak ores has been just a very specific kind of assignment mechanic that is just like, oh, it's just so much easier to do this, right? You could build in a lot of that computational stuff in game to where even if weak ores existed, you would find people just being like, I don't know, the game just kind of does it. We have players that don't use audio sounds in weak ore packs because on bosses like Skarn, on most other bosses, there's like either an in-game sound for when the bombs are actually activating, or a voice line. We have 2 players in our guild that use very minimal weak ores, and they literally listen to voice lines for when mechanics are going to happen, and it's extremely accurate.
I love that.
So I think a lot of these things are already built into the baseline game. It's just about choosing like when and how to apply them.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think your example, going back to Nathri of Sludge Fist, I think is a great one, right? Like a lot of that was just practice and just learning like how to react to these situations when chained to different partners and dodging the stuff. And people were in enough situations over enough time.
That was
they
tough.
kind of develop that muscle memory, that sense of planning, and eventually your guild as a whole overcomes the challenge. Compared to, let's say, the Stone Legion generals that came after it, a couple of issues there, but like one of the central mechanics that was being solved by weak auras was like, all right, there's a whole bunch of soaks that need to be covered over the course of the fight, and it's not realistic to have that like 7 to 8 soaks up simultaneously, where you need to also account for like, well, this person just got targeted by different mechanics, so they need a backup to go in and do it for them.
Yeah, so it sounds initially like it's, we're restricting what add-ons can do, but really we're opening up the universe of mechanics that can exist in a WoW boss without, because there are so many that you could think of right now where all of them would be, this is going to get solved by this, right? This is going to get solved by this, but if that's not the answer, then now the designers have all these tools back, and we can get these mechanics that maybe haven't been used since MOP because we've been weak oring them ever since, and now we get to solve them with our brains again.
Let's go.
And he even mentioned too,
exciting.
he said like, well, there's a lot of swirlies now.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, like, oh, we can always default to this and a few other things because you're not going to solve that with weak ore, so we can add fights where that's not a thing. But you remove that, that friction of there's too many swirlies goes away. And I think there's assignment, like doing a lot of these assignment bosses without a weak ore that could work would be like really fun. Like it's fun to do that. It's fun when you have 5 people that need to soak something, like the last phase of Gallywix. There's a frontal on a side of a room, and 2 people die. And right now, weak ore is just like, okay, well then we're going to assign backup. So these 2 people get a big green thing on their screen, go soak that. That is something where that fight is spread out enough where you could actually communicate that. We need 2 people on the right to back up because 2 soakers are dead. Who can do it? This person says something. This person says something. Now, obviously, you're not going to have that kind of communication like heroic and normal. Maybe you won't be in comms, whatever. But in Mythic, that's perfectly reasonable, right? A lot of the things, like we could probably count honestly on 1, maybe 2 hands over the last like 4 or 5 years how many bosses would you meaningfully would have to have a mechanic change, but they are very impactful, very memorable, and they have been purely defined by that. Are you worried at all about the communities, and this has certainly been ramping up over time, like you mentioned, even for us, we were much more just do the mechanic 4 or 5 years ago than we are now. Are you worried that there has been this built-in reliance on it that might be hard to shake when creating new rates?
Just have to say this. Red t-shirt? Shout out to red t-shirt guy. Shout out to red t-shirt guy. Hey, anyone? Shout out to red t-shirt guy. If you know, you know.
Bosses.
Absolutely. And I think that some of that gets back to us knowing that we need to really ease into this, that any world where we just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and say, all right, have fun,
honestly,
we're in a new world, as opposed to building up more built-in functionality, starting to have clearer visuals, simplify some mechanics, and then building counters and to have classes designed around a world where we know that this isn't possible. As long as people are set up for success, I think we'll be fine. Certainly, if we were to disable any functionality and then players went into a new tier and we're just wiping to bosses and they used to clear heroic comfortably and now they're brick walled halfway through heroic, yeah, players that would be a source of tremendous frustration. But we know that we need to avoid that by any means possible, and we have a lot of work to do before we get there.
Something that really encourages me is the ping system. That seems like such a perfect way to give us an option to identify where we're going, right? You can just ping where you're going, and then you don't have to, try and communicate with words. Hey, I'm going to move over to the left 20 yards, right? I just ping where I'm going, and that opens up an ability to solve these again in a YOLO style, right, rather than an assignment.
I think your guild did that.
Yeah.
So the Echo of Neltharion, right?
Yeah, we just pinged it.
Yeah, so famously,
it.
everyone had the maps for that. Here's your exact spot you go, and then his guild was like, you know what, everyone just ping your spot. Mostly it gets covered. People go to the same spot every pull. But if you see 2 pings in a spot, one person has to move, right? And that could largely solve a mechanic with just something that's already built into the game.
Yeah, I think and the ping system is something we've also talked about looking to improve and to kind of broaden the sorts of things you can do with it to give people more tools to solve these problems in a coordinated way, but using their own skill and expression instead of another tool.
I enjoy the ping system as long as it's not being spammed. Eric, thanks for the raid, by the way. I appreciate it. Thank you, dude. Thank you, dude. We're just we're watching a new WoW UI video. It just came about an hour ago. We're about near the end of this here.
When I think of World of Warcraft, I'm always thinking back to when I first started playing the game, and there was this really exciting moment where I looked at it and I'm like, oh my god, I can make this game look however I want, right? I can put this here, I can have an add-on that tells me what time it is in London, what time it is in Darnassus, right? I can have all the world clocks there if I want. Dude. I can have 3 different bars at the bottom of my screen. Funny. I can do whatever I want there, and to me that's always been a strength, not a weakness of WoW. So I think there's a lot of people that disagree with me on that, but then there's also people that they hear about Blizzard thinking about restricting add-ons and they're worried about losing that. Is there any intention to go after any of that kind of customization?
Not whatsoever. And in fact, we're doing everything we can and we would do everything we can down the line to minimize any collateral damage to them. But the goal is anything that's cosmetic should be completely fair game. All informational stuff that's out of combat, again, you have RP add-ons, things that are tracking, helping with professions, tracking gathering nodes, helping you with quests, you name it, a bunch of accessibility add-ons, all of those, there's nothing harmful whatsoever about any of them. The only thing is, at the very end of the day, once we feel like we've done enough on our end to improve baseline functionality, what we'd be looking at is the ability to parse real-time combat events in a way that drives, problem solving on the fly.
So it's kind of, we build the scaffolding to then be able to take away the existing weak aura solutions that we have for these. How much of this is, so the thing that's excited me also about edit mode has been, it's so clearly based on what the community has learned.
Chat, let's make a side comment here. The edit mode, since they introduced edit mode in the game, has been one of the best UI updates ever. It really makes things, it gives you full autonomy. It lets you have any UI style cues you want to aim for, you can do it. You can remove literally anything off the screen. You could play with nothing on the screen besides your character. Or you could have, it's just the way you're able to design your own UI. And for example, we use, what's it called? We have the ability bucket on our priest, which is pretty cool. The ability bucket, and I just have I have my cooldowns and abilities in the shape of a bucket, and then I have my main raid frames in the middle of the bucket. So I have all my CDs around all the everyone's health bars. And it may not look very pretty, but when it comes to usability and allowing me to heal better in raids, it's not too bad. And I would only be able to develop my ability bucket with the edit feature that they built into the game. So it's not too bad.
Learned over 20 years, right? It's like, oh, the community has revolved around this as a solution for presenting this information. Let's give them that base in the UI rather than making them download something.
I love it.
How much of this initiative is still going to be based on what the community says, how the community reacts, versus which of these things are already kind of locked in decisions?
I'd say basically nothing here is locked in.
Okay.
Really, my hope today is to kind of begin a conversation about that direction and what areas are welcome, what areas maybe have more to do to convince the community on, and what areas we might be wrong on and should reconsider. Because I think at the end of the day, this game belongs first and foremost to our millions of players. We're trying to serve them as best we can in the long run. And I think our sense is that for many players, the feeling that they have to download and use certain add-ons in order to play the game competitively isn't really part of what's attractive about the game or healthy in the long run. And so if we can pull things back to a place where add-ons are available for those who want to use them, but people aren't feeling pressured by their groups, by just the natural demands of competition and not wanting to lose out to someone who's using more advantages, then that's going to be the healthier route in the long run.
So if I was the kind of person who wanted to write a 10-paragraph forum manifesto, this would be one of the topics to do it on, right?
Absolutely. We'll be reading, we'll be
What?
listening. I think this is a long path
Dude,
ahead.
what?
And yeah, just curious to kick off the conversation and hear how people feel about it. So rotation assist is
He's
coming
funny,
in
dude.
11.1.7, which is going to be hitting the PTR in the very near future. Can't wait to hear people's feedback as they're able to hop on and check it out. We'll be listening closely so we can make it the best it can be for everybody. It's also been amazing to just get a chance to talk through kind of the history of add-ons in WoW, where they are today, and where they might be going in the future. Thank you guys for coming out. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here. Really looking forward to see what the community has to say about
Thank
how much
you,
they want more
Dranos.
of these casts, maybe monthly, maybe bi-weekly, weekly, whatever you guys think, put it in the comments.
Every week.
Daily, just
Daily? Hey,
Daily,
you said
daily
it, it's,
updates,
not
baby.
me.
Send it.
Thank you so much, Liz. This has been
Thank
really,
you.
really awesome.
Thank you, Dratnos. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Ian. Appreciate that, guys. What do you guys think? I'm personally excited with the UI updates are coming in here. The one button spam. There's our personal DJ. The one button ability spam for. I mean, it's not too bad to get new players into the game. The rotation guide to give you guys that highlights the abilities for your rotation, tells you what specific abilities you should be using next. I think it's a good addition to the game. And then decluttering the UI is also nice. And I like how they're going down the path of removing the necessity for weak auras and putting in in-game boss mechanic cues that kind of give you hey, I should be standing over here. That's more built into the game opposed to having to go outside the game and get an add-on. So I think that video, all in a whole, is a W. Loved it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.